What's up guys, Cody here. Today is December 13th, 2022, and I'm going to give you an update on the progress I made today on the Odin Project. Let's get into it. Okay, let's start off with just a breakdown of the time it took for me to do things today. So today I spent a total of 5.25 hours on the Odin Project, and looking at the breakdown over here on the screen, we'll see that in the pink-red bars, most of my day was spent coding, just like yesterday. So we have yesterday down here, December 12th, December 13th up here. Got a little bit typing in this morning, and didn't have any knowledge checks because I'm still working on the CV app for React. So that's pretty much it for today. For the time analysis, did a lot of coding today, got pretty deep into the React app for the CV project, and actually made 20 quick Git commits today. So it's quite a bit that was built out, and let's jump into that. So just kind of looking at my time notes, I was making a lot of class components today to make the elements editable. So going back to the layout HTML that I made to actually visualize what I want to do with the project, and the application the resume that I want to make. So this is that layout that I spent a decent amount of time on yesterday, and so it has these buttons for removing and adding, but none of this is functional. Again, this is just HTML and CSS. So this is where I knitted out today for the actual React portion. So we actually have some of that. We have those buttons actually coming up. They're not functional just yet, but we do have some major functionality here for the elements of the resume. So something like the name, you can type in your name and then hover off of it or click off of it, and then it'll actually show it in the resume format. So doing it for the address. Also for the phone, email, all these different things have it. So there's a little bit of bugginess here because if you click a bunch of them pretty rapidly, you will actually have multiple things open. So that's not too big of a deal. Once you actually enter it in, you will be able to click off of it and it'll be fine. But that's for all the fields for the most part. And it has the styling that I like, what I'm looking for the layout. Still some things to work with here. These buttons do not work yet. That's something that will be coming up to work on. I also had responsibilities actually coming out and being able to be listed, like having it over here. But I ran into a little bit of a problem with this edit directly on the page feature. It was not working as expected. So I still don't have a solution for it. Ultimately, want to be able to add it with this button, which you can see it kind of works here. You can add a responsibility, but there's still some bugginess to it. And when you actually go to edit one, then you edit a bunch of them, and then it actually keeps adding as you keep doing this. So it's not flushed out completely yet. There's different reasons for that, which we can jump into a little bit later. But yeah, I'm pretty satisfied with the progress I made today. It was, again, making a lot of class components for the content within the sections, and then the title, and then making editable elements, creating events for those elements with state and property manipulation. So let's dive into that now. Okay, and we're starting in Visual Studio Code now. So we're here in Visual Studio Code. If we look over in the components folder, a lot more components than we had yesterday. Yesterday we just had the index.js, cv.js, and then in the components folder, the section.js. Today I started out by essentially starting from the top down in the hierarchy of the elements. So in section, I would then look at what I would need to make for the children of section. So title is something that is already being built for most of this section, so education and experience specifically, and also for the summary section. So we don't necessarily have a class for that. But then for the content, decided to make an actual class for the content section itself. And so that led to building that out over here. And it's slightly different for the summary, education, and experience tabs. So for the summary, it's fairly simple since it's just the content is the summary statement. So all I had to put in here was just an element. I'll get to this editable text class a little bit later. But then for the other two contents, I created classes for the education content and class for the experience content. And if we go into, let's go into the education one because I'm not currently working on that one. If we go into the education content, it has the edu div, which is just a container just to hold everything in. And then it has the institution information, and it has these elements for the institution location. So those are our inputs that we're wanting to build out for our user for the resume. Ended up creating a date range class and also the degree, and there's this button down here for removing the education, which doesn't work yet. I'll probably create a class for that as well. But you'll see that I have these editable text classes and this date range class. It's also similar over here in the experience content. We have editable text for the role, the company, the responsibility, but then we also have this date range here. So let's go into the date range first because it's a bit more straightforward, and it actually contains the editable text field. So the date range, it's just a container div that has two editable text classes that are being built and this 2p element. So when you see August 2022 to present, that's what we'll be seeing on the resume as well. But finally, let's actually get into the editable text class that I made. So it's a little bit messy because I left off, so you'll see some things like this up here that are not being utilized. Well, let's start off up here. So we have this editable text. It has three functions that are going to be used for different DOM events, for clicking, for text change, and then for focusing out when you click out of an input. So just binding them up here to the constructor and also defining state. And this state is actually being utilized for detecting when an element is being edited by the user. So when they click on the user, this edit mode will actually go to true, and then the text is the actual text that is for that specific element. So let's go down here. This is where the JSX is being built dependent upon whether or not the edit mode is true or false. If it is false, which that's what the default will be when it's initially loading up the application, it'll return all these JSX representations of the HTML elements dependent upon the element property that was passed to the editable text class. So we have that element and text class up here coming from the properties, and we'll do some logic down here to return the specific HTML element that we actually desire. We're also putting these on-click edit functions for each of those elements. So if we go up here, that will change the state and change the edit mode to true, which, since the edit mode will be true, then it'll run into this section of the code, and it'll actually create a text area for the user to modify the actual input that they want for that specific field of the resume. And then as they're typing, it'll be noticing that with this on text change and setting the state for the text object, and specifically getting the value from the user as it's being typed. And then lastly, this on blur is essentially a focus out event within React. I don't completely understand why it doesn't use focus out, but that was just a message that I got, so it suggested to use on blur. And so on blur is just you're clicking out of the input, and then it's going to run this function on edit focus out, which is something that I made, and it's going to set the state to edit mode false, which will then return the corresponding element down here, as I was talked about earlier. And so that's pretty much it for editable text. Going back to date range, so we see we have two P elements that we are creating with editable text. So we pass in a property of P for the element logic that we want to use. If the edit mode is on false, and also going to pass the text class to actually give it the proper class names for that element for our styling. And so that's with date range, so they're pretty simple here. If we go to education, there's several editable text elements here as well, the institution, the location. So this is something that's used a lot, so that's why I decided to create this class for the editable text elements. And it works really nice because it's these singular things that there is some differences in that we have different elements that are being used, different CSS styles based off of their class names, but it's fairly straightforward from that, and they have similar functionality in regards to being editable in a very simplistic way. So pretty satisfied with that editable text class element. Let's go to the experience.js. Is a little bit more complicated just because we have that list of responsibilities, and we want to be able to add responsibilities to that list as well. So at the end of the day, I was trying to make an editable list class to actually generate the list of responsibilities and then have the ability to actually add more to it. And so if we look here in the editable list JS and the class component that I've kind of got started, it's a bit complicated. It's going to have some similar kind of patterns to it as the editable text class, in that we're looking for text changes, we're looking for edits. We want to be able to edit the specific responsibility, and just being able to edit them once at a time, not like I was showing earlier with the bugginess where it was having you edit multiple ones at the same time. We want to capture those text changes and save them to the state, and then use the state to actually then handle the logic that happens down here. I don't think I'm going to be able to actually utilize what's in this render function. I might be able to use it if I put the edit mode within each responsibility, but right now I have it just as an overall edit mode that's set, and it's just one class component that's being utilized within experience.js. So if you click any of the responsibilities, if you have a couple listed, then it'll set the edit mode for essentially all of them, and then they'll all be able to be edited at the same time, which is not the functionality that I want. So I don't think I'm going to be able to necessarily do this specific way. I think I'm going to have to take this edit mode and potentially put it into this responsibility object within the state, or something else. I'm not exactly sure. If I do that, then I also have to go back down here and handle this logic a little bit differently to be focused on the responsibility for each responsibility, which would be R here, looking at the edit mode for that responsibility. That might work. I'm going to have to do some tinkering around though to actually find out, because I'm not super sure if that will work. Well, that's all I really have for today. Just to recap, got into making class components and breaking things down from a kind of top-down perspective from the layout that I built, going into the sections and making specific contents for each section that needed it. And today specifically experimented with making HTML elements that can be clicked on to be able to put into an edit mode and edited to change the state and the data that's associated with that element. And so that works for singular elements, but with these more complicated lists, and I'm figuring it's going to also be the same thing with the add experience and add education buttons. It's going to take a little bit more thinking to actually figure out how to edit those individual list items or those overall kind of experiences, and be able to have those buttons be functional for adding additional ones as well. So we'll see where it goes tomorrow. But yeah, as always, if you guys have any comments about what you saw today, or if you have any tips, honestly, definitely feel free to comment below. Let me know what you think. And yeah, I'll see you guys tomorrow.